Hi, welcome to another edition of Legal Quilts. Before we get into the quilt stuff and the last bit of scrap summer, there's been some redecorating in the Legal Quilt studio. Last few days last week we went to Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, and I lucked out and I found this Singer table in an antique store. The base, where it says Singer, and the drawers are all original. They replaced the top with a desktop, so it can't really be used for sewing anymore because there's a lip on it, but it is perfect for this chest of dry goods that my family has had forever. And now it's mine, and before it was just sitting on something and it just didn't look as good, but this was the perfect stand for it now. So I keep all my little sewing supplies and various things, as you can see, in it. And it just makes for some nice organization. Like I said, this cabinet was in my mom's sewing room when I was growing up. And we did have a Singer table that we could actually put the sewing machine on. So it's kind of nice that I've got this in the area now. So now we're going to go back to today's project. And we are finishing off, and so give me a second while I readjust the okay. Whoops. Well, that's probably nice for everybody. Okay. Can y'all see me? Oops. All right. All right. Now. Come on. Okay. So now we're at scrap summer, and we're almost over scrap summer. I can't believe it. The summer's flown by. This is the last project. The next episode, which will be the week after Labor Day, 2 weeks from today, is going to be show and tell. I'm thinking about doing it live. We'll see. And it's going to be show what you did this summer. You don't have to have completed quilts, just what you did this summer with scraps. And there's going to be a giveaway. I'm going to have some giveaway for a couple of lucky winners. So please be sure, because it's going to be participants. That's why I'm thinking of doing it live. But they'll be saying if you can't make it, I'm still going to allow, comments and stuff. I don't want anybody to miss out on the giveaway just because they couldn't make a specific time. And again, it's just going to be show your progress. You don't have to have a completed quilt. We're actually going to talk about winter projects and that sort of thing at that session, on that video, because I've got all kinds of plans. This is going to be great. So today's project, though, to finish off scrap summer, is going to be the real scrap quilt. Okay, it's really scrappy. It's called a lasagna quilt. I just discovered this. I'm like, I'm Italian. How did I not know about this? The key to and it's quilt as you go. The key to this one is prep. You need to decide how big you want your quilt to be, and then you need to cut your backing. And I did something I don't normally do on this. I pieced my backing. I usually like a big solid piece because I don't like a seam on my backing, but I decided to use, since it's the ultimate scrap quilt, I added, and there's some white down here somewhere. Anyway, I pieced my backing for the ultimate. So you need a piece the size you want. I'm using 64 by 64 because I want it to be a lap quilt. And then you cut a piece of batting the same size as your back, or roughly. You can square this up later, so don't worry. Most people don't have a cutting mat 64 by 64. You can check my social media for how I manage this. I actually went out to the patio table and I taped down my tape measure and I put it in my cutting board on the 60-inch line, and then I moved 4 inches over. You can check out my social media. I posted a picture of what the patio table looked like with the cutting board and everything. So what you do is you layer your batting and your backing on there, okay? So they're together. And you're working with the whole quilt at once. So that's why, working with really big, and that's why you can either pin it or baste it. And I went with basting because I didn't want to have to unpin as I was going along. The best way to do this, by the way, is when you get your backing all laid out flat, tape that down. I didn't, and it led to a mess. and then spray a little bit of your basting, layer your batting down. Spray a little more, layer your batting down. Otherwise you're getting caught and you're going to have ridges, and well, ruffles have ridges. We don't want our our quilts to. I just use this spray based. Anything you want will do. And again, you can use pins, okay? So you've got this giant piece of your quilt, all right? So that's step one, and that's the main prep, because again, this is quilt as you go. Then you're gonna want strips of fabric. I decided to dig into my 2.5 and 2-inch strips, and I literally just went in and grabbed a handful of each. Literally just went boom and pulled out a handful of each. You can use different sizes for this, and in fact you want to use different sizes of strips. You don't want anything too large, so I wouldn't go much more than 3.5, but you can go down as small as you want. You can use strings if you want. Your strips, the directions I read said width of fabric, but obviously if you're doing a 64-inch one, you need width of quilt. So once you know how big your quilt is, you know how long your strips need to be. And you can piece strips, because obviously we don't run around with scraps that are 60 inches long or so. And as you can see, I just did them. I sewed them together with the bias cut. You don't have to. You can sew them straight. Your pieces, you're using different size strips, but all your strips don't need to be the same size, but all the pieces in a strip do. Because otherwise then you'll get wavy rows and it just won't work, and you'll see in a minute what I mean. Okay? So you want a strip that's just long enough. All right, now these are a little longer than the 64, so I'm going to cut this down. I'm going to cut these down. And how you do that when you don't have enough and you're not outside on your patio table is you just measure. I measure halfway. So I'm going to go to 32, mark that, pull it down, and then cut again at the 32 line. And I'm kind of doing this on the wrong side, so that's going to be fun. Okay, and you just cut that one. 2-inch pieces, and again, if they're a little long, you don't want them too short, but if they're a little long, you can square up the quilt when you're done, and I'll show you what I mean, and you'll understand why I say that in a minute. So you want your pieces cut, and I sewed a few rows of 2 and 2.5 inches together so that we would have that today. Okay, so again, measure them out, and this is, again, look how I mix, just grab and mix, because it's a scrap quilt. It's called lasagna because you've got the different layers, just like you do in a lasagna, of your meat, your ricotta, cheese, and then your noodles. Well, now you've got your layers of backing and batting, and then you're going to add on the top. Give me just a second, and I'll show you what I mean by that, okay? All right. Cut a few of these. I've already created a few of these, but I just cut 2 of them for a reason. Well, actually, another 2.5 inch, just a second. I'm going to show you how to make this, and it's going to go, and it's really easy, and it's quilt as you go. You can't do a border on this, so figure out the final size of your quilt now, because you can't add a border later. And you'll see why, because it's quilt as you go. But you'll see why in a second, why you can't really add a border. So I know these are sneaking away a little bit, and it's okay if it goes over a little bit. Again, you'll see why. You should cut these. Oops, there we go. All right. So you take 2 strips, and I'm going to start out with my 2.5 inch strips here. That's my 2 inch. I'm going to start out with your 2.5 inch strips, and you put them right sides together. Okay, you see that? Right sides together. Okay. And you take your big old piece of fabric here with your backing and batting. And this is fun on a quilt that doesn't have that doesn't have a really deep throat. So what I do is I start lining it up there, and then I just roll this up so it's easier to work with, okay? So you don't have this old big piece knocked up, because you want this smooth, okay? You want to be about halfway, okay? And yeah, I'm not, okay, there you go. Okay, so at about halfway, and you start at the tippy top at one side, okay? All right? And you take those two pieces, and I'm fighting my fabric at the moment, and that's never fun. Okay? So you've got your two pieces lined up together at the edge. You want to keep your edges together. You want to get that right. This is why it's okay to have different sizes, but it's not okay to have different of strips, but not okay to have different pieces of the strips, because then you're all over the place and you're not going to have a nice smooth edge. And you literally just get that on there. And again, we're going to be maybe going over a little bit, and that's okay. And you put that down. Now remember to loosen your tension a little bit, because you're going through a lot of layers here, okay? Gather all of this up. Everything goes into the preparation here. It's all prep. So once you get your backing and your batting layered and you get your strips made, or you can make your strips as you go along, do a few at a time. All right. You just sew it down through all three layers. Again, your right sides are together, but you're sewing down one side using your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and make sure your edges are nice and smooth, okay, or nice, smooth and even, okay, and you got your whole quilt here, and you just sew along. Shove that through, keeping smooth here because you don't want any ripples or anything, and you just sew along. And this is why it's okay if it's over a little bit and everything, because as you're sewing, you're probably going to, it gathers up the fabric a little bit, so you're going to have a little different sizes. So I would actually make yours, cut yours a little bigger than you wanted, maybe an inch or two, and that will, and then you have a better chance of getting closer to your final size. I also, as you can see how you're working with this, you probably don't want to do this as a king size quilt. Or if you do, do it in parts and sew them together, I don't know. But you see why you can't put a border on it, because you're quilting as you go, and so you can't have something separate over there that you then add. Now I've got red thread in here because this is your quilting as you're going through the lines, as you're sewing this on to the batting and the backing. Basically adding your top in, you're creating and sewing your top on at the same time. And I've got red thread because, like I said, that's going to be the quilting, and it's going to show through on the bottom. So you want something, you don't have to, you can match your backing fabric if you want. But I'm using this also as an excuse. I had a leftover bobbin of red thread, so I decided to use red. I found the matching red spool and decided that was what I was going to use. Because again, I pieced the back of I pieced my backing, so matching, it's not going to match at some point. So I figured I would just have fun and get all these straight rows that'll go from end to end and do that. This isn't to say that when you're done you can add some other quilting in there, but this is getting everything done. You could piece your batting too, but at this point I was like, I'm done. I am not franken piecing my scrap batting together to get this on here. Although you could just then, cut it up into pieces and baste it on each separately and making sure your edges overlap a little bit, and that probably might be easier. But I just wasn't in the mood to do it, so I just used a big piece of batting. So the batting is not scrap, but everything else is. And you just keep sewing. Okay. Just keep sewing all the way over. And making sure everything stays nice and smooth. Just sew from edge to edge, which is why I did a square, so it doesn't matter where I started. But if you do it lengthwise, whatever, you just make sure you sew from edge to edge, whether you want to do long strips, horizontal or vertical strips, doesn't matter. Just pick a side and sew to the other side, making sure your strips are long enough. I'm seriously wondering if you could do this on the diagonal, but I think that would be harder because you would have to think and make sure they're going in the right way, because you start in the middle and I'll show you in a minute as soon as I finish this, but basically you alternate sides so you're building out evenly and your quilt doesn't get as distorted as much. So you want to make sure you keep your angles going the same way and nothing drives you nuts. But I guess you could do it from corner to corner, starting in the middle. You'd have to remember where you bisect it, but you could do it. We do it with string quilts all the time, and spider quilts, so there's no reason you couldn't do it with this. It's just a bigger square. And if you think of this as just a spider quilt, or string quilt, or strings, you're all set. And then you finish off the row, and I went a little over, so that's okay. Where am I hiding my goodies? Under my So Easy table. And you snip both sides, okay? And then you go back up here, and you make sure you snip your threads here, and you open it out, and see, that's already sewn on. You can see it's sewn on the back there. See? And that's sewn down. And when you open it up, you take your next piece, which this is a slightly smaller one. And this is why, you see, you don't want wavy things. Take your next piece, which got knocked to heck and gone. Oh, where's the one I got? I'm not gonna worry about it right now. You take your next piece, which in this case I'm going to use my 2-inchers, and you lay it on top of one of the other pieces, because remember, you're going to work side to side, but I'm just going to do one side because sewing 60 inches takes a while. Okay. And this down. Make sure everything's nice and smooth and not caught under there. Line up your edges again, and same thing. Just right sides together. Make sure your right sides are together all the time, and then you just sew on the unsewn edge of that bottom piece. There we go. My thread sometimes gets wrapped around the foot, so I always have to be prepared to snip it, like I just did. But remember, this is the loose edge that lifts up. You want to sew that down next. And you just do this until your quilt is filled. You can alternate sizes, you can mix and match. It can be random. Again, this is all going to be just 2.5-inch strips. But you can have anything from 3.5 all the way down to 1 inch if you really want to deal with something that small. And just randomly put the pieces in. Because again, this is a scrap quilt. So you're just going to put a lot. This is just a way, away from the 1/4 inch seam allowance there. This is just using up your scraps. So you can use any size you want and you can vary them. And then you just keep sewing straight down, straight from side to side, nothing fancy. Just straight stitch. You don't have to change feet on your sewing machine, anything. Just use your regular sewing machine foot and you just keep going. And make sure your fabric lays flat the whole time you're backing and you're batting. And you've stretched it out, and so you've already, done, make sure your pieces are flat as they lay down, that there's no puffing when you're done, and you just sew. Okay? And that's it. Let's keep going, we've almost got it. This is great because once you get the prep done where you've got your backing and your batting, and this is why you based it on, is because you don't want your batting being flying around while you're trying to sew it to the backing. You can pin, but as you see, as you're going along, you're going to have to take the pins out. And I don't want to put the pins in because that's long and boring, and I don't want to have to take them out. So I decided to use the spray based. Again, making sure your fabric stays flat as you're sewing it down. You can iron your fabric after you make it into strips, before you put it into strips. If your bucket's anything like mine, they're just thrown in there and then they're getting all wrinkly. This is a great way to use up all those strips from all the odd strips that are floating around. You're doing your log cabins, or your courthouse steps, or any of the strip quilts. You always got those odd strips floating around. Well, here you go. You can just sew them into lines long enough that you need, and again, sew them a little over and cut them down later. You can either cut them down after you sew them on or before as the strips go. And you just keep doing this. And if you got larger pieces, you can cut your strips down to whatever size you want to work with. And you don't have to vary your size. You want to do it all 2.5 inches, you can do that. And as you can see, but you don't want, I mean, it's not wrong to do this, but you kind of want your joins here. See where it joins? You want those at different spots just to add a little visual appeal. If they're all at the same spot, that's all you're going to see. And you don't want that taking away from the visual of the quilt. So make sure if you're piecing together, you're using pieces of various sizes, just of lengths of pieces, so that you get a little variety here. And if you sew too much together wrong, well, you got more pieces. If you sew too much together, not wrong, but too long, well, you can always, there we go. Please like my videos, subscribe, buy stuff with the affiliates so I can buy a new sewing machine with a deeper throat, so I'm not shoving fabric through all the time. You really want to make sure you're hitting that, the edges are lined up, so that it's all sewn down, because this one it's a lot harder to go back and fix. Okay? So, as I was saying about the pieces, if you've got, your pieces are long afterwards and you got more cut off, that's okay. Now you got scraps for a different project. And I have an idea that I will discuss next scrap summer, because of course we're doing this again. As the first one comes to a close, I already have ideas for next summer. Because I always have more ideas for quilts than I have time to make them. I think that's the way for everybody. That's it. You just sew this down. Sew the last one down. Or off of the edge there. Pull it that way. Put it under my Sew Easy here. Alright. I have my doubts if someplace got sewn properly. Nope, it's okay. Alright. And as you can see, yes, you're working with a lot of bulk here, so just remember that and be prepared. But the great thing about this is you can work on it for a bit and then go do something else, and you know where you left off because you can see. And that's all you do, is you just sew these just keep sewing lines down and down. Right? So this is actually the perfect, I got 5 minutes to sew project. Whatever thread is in your machine you can use. You don't have to change out feet. You just grab your project and go. This is a great, simple one to do. That's Lasagna Quilt, and that's the last project, last way to use up your scraps from Scrap Summer. Again, in 2 weeks we're going to have show and tell, and I will have a little giveaway. And also, we're still posting things on the website. But here you go. Here's the QR code again for all the social media and my website. Affiliate links will be in the comments, will be in the episode description. Please buy things. Use your local quilt shop. If you can't get it at your local quilt shop, please buy from Amazon using my links, because again, that helps me to keep making videos, buy the supplies I need, etc. So that's it. See you next time. I can't wait to see everybody's projects.